Alright, hell yeah. So one of my favorite subscribers says, hell yeah, have you found that the cat boats surf better than the round boats? And so we're gonna do a full breakdown. Alright, this is just all my writing, and you kind of have to use your imagination, but we're gonna do this because over this trip I came up with, I don't know, just a lot of things that need to be kind of explored. Alright, so hell yeah. So alright, this is my full rundown. Think of the boat, any raft, as just what touches the water surface, nothing more. That's going to be its dynamics, okay? A round boat can edge. Like my boat, I can put on edge and the other side is going to come out of the water. So when surfing a small wave hole with a small pile, I can work that pile back and forth because I just have that one contact point. And, I can edge hard. And then without the upstream side of the boat, catching water, purling to a flip. Where a paddle cat can't do that. You can't edge a paddle cat currently. So that would be my first redesign of a paddle cat. Be able to edge onto one tube if possible. The biggest downside of a round boat is that, and this is kind of auxiliary, but we'll talk, because I just talked about how edging, the biggest downfall of a round boat is that when you do edge it, the effective surface area is just like, I can compare it to a beach ball or like a basketball in a wave that's just going to roll. But I do point out this. The biggest downside of a round boat is that it bathtubs. The front fills up with water. That water moves to the center of the boat, just all over, the whole boat bathtubs. It does this too easy and it gets locked sideways. And it gets locked sideways in any hole. But at the Montgomery Wave Park, I got locked sideways in a big wave hole. This thing should surf like a wave, but it was locking me in sideways. So my Montgomery footage shows that. Cool. And that's what I would call a wave. And my boat went sideways like it was in a hole, and it was just kind of stuck there. Now, it was a fun ride. You're like, hell yeah, I'm surfing a hole, but you're not owning that hole. You know what I mean? You're not, and even this came up like on the Stikine when like a kayak gets kind of caught into a hole, and if you are, like a wave hole, this was a wave hole, where you need to be able to turn and then carve down the face and then towards the exits. And so currently, because around boat bathtubs, that's not, you don't really have any control once the boat gets weighted. So the biggest downfall of a round boat is getting stuck in a side surf. I found the paddle cat with minimum cockpit. That's the current design of a paddle cat. It does not bathtub. And coupled with the wide tubes, where the downstream tube could be out of the hole when the upstream tube, the one that's in the hole, is getting surfed. This makes it easier, I found, to spin and then exit. Spin to exit in the RMR paddle cat and so this is what I'm describing, a pour over, a powerful pour over, but it's kind of a wave pour over. But that's one of the holes at the lower, in Charlotte at the Whitewater Center. So I have footage of that. So I am disappointed that I didn't try the RMR paddle cat in the low water Salida wave. And they call it Salida. That bums me out. They don't use the Spanish pronunciation. Anyway, Salida. I was just there and I tried out my round boat at a very low water level. I did not stay 2 days. It was getting cold. I was ready to come home. Anyway, I should have tried the paddle cat in that small wave because it would have front surfed. And so what do I say here? To see if it would be sticky in a side surf. My round boat wasn't really side surfing, but it was carving sideways. And I just wanted to know if a paddle cat would even carve sideways. Front surf, it would have done just fine, would have excelled. And then spins, I don't know, but and we'll talk about that in a second. So I think it would have not had side surfed because the downstream tube would have got pulled out. It'd front surf like a champ, and it wouldn't get kicked out in a nose wheelie. So that's the cool thing about a paddle cat with the two pointy nose. They tack up, but then they release. Compared to two things are going on with the round boat. The front of the boat tacks up and then water spills into it and it does like a wheelie. But the other thing is the front of a round boat, you have like a foot. Like even if it's a pointy, it's like a foot tall. It's too tall and it's like a catcher's mitt to those waves. All right. Okay, so that was the big takeaway of pointy cat tubes in a surf wave. Far superior. Cool, they grip, and so they help you surf down the wave, but then they can pop up early and keep you surfing compared to a nose wheelie to exit in a round boat. And we talked about the two different ways you'll exit in a round boat. Fill up with water and do a nose ender, whatever they called. But also, as that's purling, the front of the boat is like a foot tall and you're getting just pushed out. Cool. The other advantage of a paddle cat will go a long way with R1, especially if you could fully edge. Yeah, so if you could fully edge a paddle cat, hell yeah. And we'll talk about that more. On to one tube. If you could do that, is the fact that the paddle cat... I don't even know I think this sentence got out of control. But basically, the paddle cat, think of it as two R1 rafts. You know what I mean? Because you got one tube on one side, one tube on the other. They're two independent rafts that you're controlling simultaneously. This is one of the huge advantages. One of the fundamentals I have found with surfing a raft on a wave is to always be moving your body. This is in a round boat now. Moving my body towards the tallest part of the wave, which is usually the pile. In a paddle cat, this can be as easy as just jumping to the other tube, which is nearer the pile. So what do I say? Which more dramatically, so jumping to the other side, which more dramatically shifts what part of the boat is in the water. Yeah, so even though you're in a paddle cat and both tubes are touching water, one is heavily weighted because you're on it, the other isn't weighted because you're not sitting on it. And so jumping to those different sides, definitely, it's dramatic and it's instantaneous, and we talk about how that's a benefit. So hopefully I am saying that clearly. But jumping from one tube to the other, it has such better and drastic and instantaneous benefits when surfing and river running. So that was pretty cool to see. Hell yeah. And I'll just say now the downside of a paddle cat is slow to turn. It shouldn't be. It should feel like a tank turning, but I guess it turns like a tank. It's very slow. All right, I have found in R1 that where you are weighting the boat, your body position is king and determines kind of everything. Your body position in relation to the current that's underneath you, that's everything. And then but hey, there might be a variation of current next to you. Like there might be current under the boat that's not being weighted by you. Cool, under a different part of that boat, and you can exploit this by jumping to that part of the boat. The second you do that, cool, your dynamics changed. And with a paddle cat, this is, it's way better than a round boat, so I will say that. As an example, catching an eddy, I jump my body into the stagnant water. So let's say you're paddling into an eddy and you're paddling on the side away from the eddy. That has benefits because you're paddling towards it and then prying into it. You're kind of moving in that direction. And then the second maybe this left corner of your boat hits that eddy, you just jump over to that. And what I have found even in a paddle cat, it's even stronger. We talked about how it's two R1 rafts, so you're basically leaving one boat to go to the other boat, and the other boat's in that stagnant water. So you just locked yourself in. Hell yeah. All right, so I like my round boat when surfing because it closely mimics a whitewater kayak when edging. Hands down. You're in a pile, you're gonna like carve back and forth, lean up into that pile. And then your exposed edge, the other part of the boat that you're not sitting on, is edging and is out of the water. And my boat is rockered under the foot, side to side rocker. And this is the benefit of that. The downside is it flips way easy. All right, what do I say? But it is just as tippy as the kayak. Yeah, that's a huge downside. I found that the paddle cats were inherently stable. I never flipped at the Whitewater Center. I fell out a lot out the back, and I don't say that anywhere in this writing. So yes, you fall out the front and the back because there's nothing to catch you. And so that would, I think it's very easy just to make an elevated, pocket to land in. That's not going to mess with your dynamics with like it purling water and stuff. I will say that I don't feel comfortable at all falling out of paddle cats. The RMR Fat Cat, the side tubes are too big. Actually, I think when I pull myself in the side, it's difficult, and I think the boat like just wants to flip over. So those don't need to be that way. You can have high seat positions, like where you're seated, and on the back thwart, where I have it, because the elevated floor is also elevated, you need to sit up high. But still, the midpoint of the boat, maybe when pulling yourself in, should be lower, so I don't talk about that either, but that would be a huge improvement to a paddle cat, being able to enter the paddle cat on the side and not just the front and rear. And so because of this, I said that re-entry from the front and back just seems it's overly complex. It's not my style from a round boat, just holding onto the perimeter line, especially when holding onto a boat as I fall out. But hey, a lot of the cat boaters, they're not holding on either, and they're still recovering their boat in big class 5 situations. But it sucks, hands down, compared to just being with your boat and having that reflip closer mimicking the speed of a kayak reflip. All right, but I never flipped in the Fat Cat, and a dozen times. Yeah, and then, so the Fat Cat, stable, didn't flip. At Montgomery, flipped a dozen times. It was crazy. And that's just, it wasn't until this year where I'm just like, hey, I can say the negatives about my boat, you know what I mean? And because now we should be making... You know what I mean? That's why I'm doing this. It's like, hell yeah, my boat is actually aging itself out, and the future is in front of us. All right, so I have been using a new paddle technique where I can feel my feet. Oh, this is really cool. So just even in my round boat, I'm putting weight down on my feet and less on my seat. And that didn't need to rhyme, but putting weight on your feet, that's putting weight into the floor, and that's shifting the weight from the outside tube to the floor. And so that has dynamic benefits. Like, your weight is king in a boat, and even just shifting a few pounds here and there, I've been noticing some different dynamics. I don't really talk about what those dynamics offer, but in a Fat Cat we do. So when surfing the Fat Cat, now that's an elevated floor, just a fabric floor. But when you're surfing, there's a little bit of touch to the water when surfing. And so water would touch, and the part... and so I would push down with my feet, even in that elevated cockpit, and that part of the water would grip up. And this was cool because it felt like, I was driving the boat with my feet. It was actually a really cool sensation, and I used it a lot. Like, that was cool. And so that's also what I learned this year, is that what's touching water is tacking up. If something's tacking up in a surf wave, that's going to grip, you know what I mean? And so either grip in or grip out, you know what I mean? So, surf you in or maybe pull you out and stuff like that. But, what contacts, that's also king. Weight and what's touching water. I'm going to grab some, I got some ice water here. Hell yeah. I feel like we're doing good enough. I can take a little break. All right. So it took me a while to say negative things about my round boat and round boats in general. But here's the things that have to change overnight. One is that the front and rear of a round boat should take in no water. That's crazy that they do. You could do a zip-up front and rear compartments. You could even air inflate those. But you know what I mean? There's no reason that those compartments should take in. And playing off a paddle cat, the inner cockpit should be totally isolated. You know what I mean? Where that's the only place that can take in water. And, you know what I mean? You should almost have a design, like we talked about. The center of the boat is place where I'd hardly sit. So maybe, You know what I mean? Even in a symmetric boat, the very, very center, I don't think anyone puts their, butt there. So that should be, tube-wise, lower. You know what I mean? And so when water fills up, it's going to exit. I'm sure there's a term for that on a ship, like where that happens. But yeah, then you just don't take in, and then also thinking of your cockpit almost like the basin of a toilet, where if you're, I do like the cockpit in a rectangle that's has stuff in it, but still the the paddle cat cockpits are highly superior for the amount of water they take in. So enough said there. So if a boat is going to be diamond shaped, like my boat or the RMR Thundercloud, I exclude the Merlin Excalibur because it's so pointy, but it is tall. I definitely talk about how you still have a 12-inch tube in height, vertical height, and that's got to change. But anyway, so instead of a diamond shape, like you should have dual points. You should always have, because that was even if you do have a diamond point, you should have dual points, because that is highly superior. Where you have two, it's kind of like, I don't know. You could think of it as rails of a kayak, maybe engaging at the same time. If you had hard rails on both sides. But yeah. So that is the biggest downside of my boat, and we talk about it a little bit. How it's like a beach ball. It's rockered everywhere. It's kind of rockered underfoot, side to side, front to back. It's rockered. And then so it just washes out. It's literally just like a rounded, just like the bottom of a beach ball. And in the water, it wants to flip itself out. Okay, what are we talking about? Yeah, so just, if you're going to have a pointed nose, have dual points. So if my diamond-shaped nose is yay wide, you know what I mean? It's very, then just have 2 points instead of just this huge, flat spot. And then also, that flat spot, I'm hard to figure out adjectives for that, but don't make it 12 inches tall, because that thing is just going to, it should be slicey, you know what I mean? Even if it slices pearls and then wants you to do like an ender, that's still way better, because basically, you're going to be sitting in the back anyway, so if it's going to slice, it's going to pull, the thing that happens is that tube punches in, and then it just stops. Whether it is a pointy tube, it's still 12 inches tall. So that's difficult to design from where you just use raft material. But no, they already figured it out. You use cat tubes. And so whether you have a series of cat tubes or just that cat tube shape, have dual points, stuff like that. All right, we got to move on. So I hope this makes sense. Yes, the front of the boat shouldn't be 12 inches. That's crazy. That's got to stop, because it acts as a stopper. I would like to have a paddle cat. Oh, it would be like, so here's the scenario. Having a paddle cat with squared off ends, like non-pointy ends, it would just plow and then stop momentum. And it's going to be not what you want. Okay, so the paddle cat. So this is what the paddle cat needs. When you sit in a paddle cat, you need to be able to lean back and to the side, and that's going to release 3/4 of the boat like a round boat. We talked about earlier how your weight is greatly larger than the weight of the raft. Some of these paddle cats are only 45 pounds. You know what I mean? And so me just sitting on the back corner, that's where the weight is. So effectively, 3/4 of the boat doesn't have weight on it. And, you know what I mean? And you do get a little bit of that property, but not enough. And so we're going to talk about how to bring that property out, even in a paddle cat. So when sitting in the back and leaning out, I can release 3/4 of the boat in my round boat. This concept works, and it'll work the same with a fat cat. It just doesn't work well at all. We just mentioned that. This is probably a happy, so there could be a happy medium, but I'm going to talk about progressive, having sponson. The word sponson is just going to be something that's not touching the water initially. When you're sitting in your normal position, you're going to have some part of the boat that's out of the water, and then when you lean into that position, a portion of inflatable boat now touches the water. That is going to be my definition of the word sponson. So sponson doesn't have to be an attached tube. It can be just part of the design of a boat. So like a whitewater kayak has sponsons. They're just called chines. You know what I mean? And stuff like that. All right, hell yeah. And so, hell yeah, so we're going to use that, yeah, and that design can then release the other tubes and, release maybe even up to 3/4 of the boat just by doing a normal lean back into the outside. Hell yeah. So I have been thinking of ways to make directly under the traditional sitting position. Yeah, this is what I think I want to experiment with. Where you sit has to be an unstable balance point. And because I want to be able to just shift back 4 to 6 inches, or something reasonable, and then the boat's going to tip up into a wheelie. But when I'm just sitting in my normal sitting position, it's going to feel actually rock solid, stable. And so how do you do that? Well, in the current sitting position, most of the boat is out front. So hey, we just talked about, yes. And then so this is why I'm writing this, because, I just thought of this while writing this. Who cares? If it is, and so I'm going to talk about a stair-step design. And so like right underneath your sitting position or just behind is a stair step. And so in this visualization, I don't think you should think of the cat tube as being round. I think it'd be easier to think of the cat tube as a like sup board. And so you basically have a big sup board that goes back to your seated position, but then all of a sudden the sup board stair steps up and then, and then goes back. We already sit in the back, 3/4 of the boat anyway. And so, and let's say this stair step is 4 inches. It could be 2 to 4 inches. I don't know. But hell yeah. And it has to be, the back can be touching. So even if you do have a stair step of a couple inches or 3 inches, maybe even 4 inches, the back can be touching, but still the second you lean a foot back, you're like, whoa, you just release the front. So it's, that has to be played with. I'm not going to say anything more about that. But hell yeah. Then after shifting back this short, the back will have to tip, onto this shorter deck. And then this will help when turning, because now you can effectively turn the boat, or you can get that 3/4 of the boat out of the water. The stair step would be going the wrong direction, sure. So, but when backwards, I think it might be okay. And then this is just going to be a one-directional boat. And then I just talk about, and then usually, when someone, I don't know, when you make something one-directional, someone always finds a way to go the other direction and find improvements. So like, oh, it actually works better backwards. So, and then, so this design could also still have a long water line, because in this design, your water line's effectively shorter. And I think I wrote it right in here, but basically this design works because the majority of your boat is out in front of you. And so that will weight down and then have that, so it's not just going to constantly tip back. Cool. And you can still have a long water line by leaning to the side. If you lean to the side and then a long sponson, that's the length of the entire boat engages. We just talked about that. What a sponson is. Then now you have a long water line that's independent of just leaning back into that corner. So hell yeah. All right. So what I thought is the best advantage of a round boat. Yeah, so the best advantage of the round boat is prying sideways, and just the agility of it. I talk about that, but so yeah, I use sideways pries all the time to work my round boat up an eddy to catch a surf, and it's probably just because it is round and it doesn't have edges and it doesn't really have tracking, and so the thing wants to track sideways just as easily as it does, lengthwise. A paddle cat sucks at moving sideways with a pry. So I think this can be remedied just by a paddle cat being able to edge just on one tube. I don't think so. Not 100%, but it helps. If we can edge a paddle cat onto one tube, it might pry sideways a little bit more. And then so the boat might be able to then pry sideways better. But that might be irrelevant because here might be the biggest benefit. One pontoon slicing through the water should be far superior to moving the boat where you want it to go compared to a sideways pry. So if in a paddle cat you were able to lean the boat onto edge and you had this long effective edge, then you have your tracking. The other edge is out of the water. You're like, I'm going that direction. And so here's also what I didn't write about. So let's say you go put that edge back into the water, the other edge. Now, like underfoot, you should have a boat that's rotationally, easy to rotate. So that also is kind of the sponson design where even if you just have two cat tubes that are just neutral, the underneath shape could be where like, hey, they're kind of rockered enough where they can just turn easily. The front and rear, the bow and stern of those tubes aren't really engaged in the water. And so rotational momentum, that's the term that the kayakers use. You should have easy rotational momentum. But then when you do lean onto that sponson tube, and then if you can get down to just one tube, that would be killer. Because now you're just pure tracking. So just that ability, and this is where R1 is superior, because I can move my weight, I can move my body, to various locations of the boat instantaneously. It's a fun thing to do, and you get different dynamics, and so that should be 100% exploited. Cool. So the main current issue with paddle cat is the slow rotation. Yeah, it's almost like, it's like, what? RMR paddle cat, 45 pounds, it seems, it's like rotating a brick, so we definitely talk about that. That's the negative term I'm going to use. I'm also going to use a negative term about my boat. It's a beach ball, you know what I mean? So you have this, let's say you're going to take either to the Stikine. Would I take the RMR paddle cat or my round boat? Probably my round boat because I don't mind holding on and just treating it like a flotation device. The paddle cat sounds like death to fall out of. But still, my boat's a beach ball. The paddle cat is like paddling a brick. And so both can be improved upon. So that's what we're going to share, kind of the take-home point of this. And both don't have to be improved to the same boat. You know what I mean? A paddle cat can improve to still be a paddle cat. A round boat can still be improved to be a round boat. A round boat might have points, might look like a paddle cat. A paddle cat might underfoot, have a surface that looks like a round boat, might look like the surface underfoot of a whitewater kayak, just with a strip cut out of the middle. That's kind of what I was thinking. It's probably, you just take the current whitewater kayak that's doing the best, cut a strip out of the middle, and that is what your paddle cat tube should be. Now, I don't think so. From R1, we talked about how because you're already sitting out onto that outer tube, you definitely need it more sponsoned. You need to have your neutral position and then your edged position that potentially gets that other tube out of the water. All right, hell yeah. Where are we? The main current issue with paddle cat is slow rotation. This also gets in the way when surfing. One edge will start to catch and you're going to turn, and there's literally nothing you can do. Okay, hell yeah. But the main issue with the round boat, and then this is possibly second to taking in too much water, because I think the taking in too much water should just be an overnight flip. No one should be making a round boat that fills up like a bathtub. I mean, if you're going to be performance boating, it's the worst. You can't even play in a hole that you want to play in because you're just, okay, I'm going to be in a side surf. And it can exhaust all your energy. Your boat might be stuck in there. It's crazy. Where, I didn't write this, but yeah, the paddle cat design can exit these holes way easier. All right, so what are we writing about? The main issue with round boat, second or first to taking in too much water, is that it's shaped underfoot like a basketball, especially my boat. We talked about rocker underfoot, sideways rocker. And so when you're surfing a hole or just even a wave, your boat is always going to be finding the bottom of that hole. Where you're sitting is where you're going to be in the bottom of that hole. and the other portion of your boat usually up against the upstream side of that wave, ready to purl. That's the issue. And whether so yeah, you could even downstream flip. I mean, you could flip in both directions, one after you purl, or just even being on that heavy side and then flipping, doing a downstream flip, a low side flip. And so that's the issue. It's too much rocker with an R1 boat. And after taking my paddle cat to the Whitewater Center, I think there's going to be a happy medium. I do think you want railed edges with the ability to edge and get onto one tube. If you could do that, because if you're able to get the boat onto one tube in a paddle cat design, you're effectively paddling two R1 rafts. And that would just be like bonkers superior, where you're just like, huh? Like, I'm basically paddling one R1 raft with an outrigger. So that's all that should be. The other tube should just be an outrigger of weight, and then when you want to use it, hell yeah, and then you can jump over to it. So I think there's just this ability to be like, hell yeah. And you know, and this could be scaled to a 12-foot boat, a 10-foot boat, and I would love this scaled down. You know, I'm looking for the best performance surfing boat, which you know, we're talking 8 feet maybe. Cool. All right, so where the paddle, and I need some more water. I think we're doing good enough. Take a little break. All right, hell yeah. So where the paddle cat is way more forgiving in a side surf, yeah. So if you're, if you're side surfing a hole, it's just way more forgiving. You know, because of that basketball like approach of my round boat. Man, it feels like you're just going to get bucked into a flip every single time. Where the paddle cat is way superior in these holes because one tube is surfing the hole, but it's a round surface. Does that make sense? Like, if you just have a round tube in a hole, it just kind of wants to spin, but it can't spin because it's connected to the other cat tube, which is out of the hole and downstream. And so... and it can shear that tube and start to rotate it and then purl it and stuff like that, but way more stable. Cool. All right. So where a paddle cat is way more forgiving in a side surf and well as able, so it's able to spin out, and you're able to, yeah, so if you're locked in the sides, you're able to spin out. I can turn the boat, but yeah, I didn't say the negatives. Like, obviously, the fat cat also just gets locked into a side surf because it's too long. You know, the paddle cats are too long. And so that needs to change. Whether the outside profile, you know, kind of that sponson shape, things that don't touch the water until they do when they're locked into a side surf, then that can touch a rounded surface. That can help get that boat to turn. So I didn't mention that, so I'm glad I'm mentioning that right now. All right, so this is, I'm going to talk about something speculative, but I would like a boat to tip backwards into a slight wheelie when shifting. Yeah, so I'm going to talk about something very specific. If I'm kind of centered in the boat while paddling and I shift my weight backwards in the center, I want the boat to hit its first contact point. So I want it to tip just like we talked about, you know what I mean, just tipping back and wheeling. But I want that contact point to be in the center. And what I talk about is that can be like two pontoons, you know what I mean? So it can still be a stable position. What I have found is that, and I didn't mention this enough, is that you don't want to, when leaning back into like a position, you know, like you don't want just like one point of stability, you know, or just because that's going to be an unstable balance point. Even my diamond-shaped boat, when it goes rams into a hole, it's a very unstable point. When I go jump on it, I'll get washed out into a flip very easily. Compared to if it's stabbed with 2 points, it could be dramatically improved. Cool. What I'm talking about here is having two different places of, so leaning back in the center. Cool. You get these contact points. But then we talked about how leaning back into the side can release 3/4 of the boat. So I would put that lean back to the side a bigger lean back where I have to like, so this first lean back on the center hits, so you have a stair step design, cool, the boat tips just a little bit. Those other pontoons that are out to the side are not engaging, whether due to a stair step, but then once I lean back farther and sideways on those, then I'm releasing 3/4 of the boat. So that's it. And with inflatables, they're so large, you have the ability to have these multiple, I'm going to say sponsored positions, but just multiple stability positions. Like the word is secondary stability, but you can have multiple positions of secondary stability. I think that's the best way to say it compared to tertiary stability and whatever comes after that. In my mind currently is to make a very stubby R. So yeah, to emphasize this, I really want like as narrow as possible, an R1 boat cockpit. The cockpit in my boat could be smaller. And if you're not worried about air inflated tubes, if you made the boat out of fiberglass, you don't have to have like all this wasted space. But you have an R1 cockpit, and then I really want a short, stubby boat. We talked about how the front of the boat, and maybe we didn't. The front of the boat, I don't mind a diamond shape. And I don't mind on that diamond shape having kind of a flat. We talked about how you could have 2 points, but if you could design it however you wanted to, you definitely want those to come to a smooth point, just like the front of a whitewater kayak. There's no reason it should be any different. That way you don't have like 12 inches of water just stopping. But in this design, then I could lean forward and then kind of ender. And then I could have secondary cat tubes that are out to the side of this inner boat that maybe they're at higher angles. They're above the water line, so they're not engaged. And like underfoot in the normal, they might be engaged, so your boat is wide. But then these cat tubes either stair-stepped or highly angle to where the front of the boat actually is now in the water. But and I'm just going to talk about the front of the boat when it comes to what I'm talking about here, because that seems unstable in the back of the boat, having this, what I'm talking about. But yeah, this would be for like a play boat. I was trying to think of a play boat that you could still have stability. Because, if you're going to do an ender in a play boat, you're just going to tip over. It's going to suck. But this way, you can do an ender up to a certain angle and then have these other pontoon boats, engage. And they're going to be pointy. They engage. They're not going to get pointy tubes are good because they pop back up. And so anyway, so that's all. That's kind of speculative. All right. But no, I think I want to make an R1 play boat and then having sponsons to, do a move, but then keep you from flipping. Hell yeah. Okay, so the take-home point in my mind is to share the equally negative things about the current paddle cat and the current round boat. You know what I mean? I'm finally okay with saying negative things about my round boat because you get, whatever that word is, where you're just like, hell yeah, my boat's tops. And then you're just like, no, I've flipped. And I was just like, why aren't other people flipping so much? It's like, am I just going big? And I don't think so. I think my boat, like we said, is like that basketball. It flips out. And so we need more stability for sure. Okay, even though it's fun, I love my boat because of that. I've been hesitant to do a lot of dangerous rivers just because you get unlucky. I flipped out at the top of this wave, or this rapid, and now I have to swim something horrendous. Okay, so the paddle cat, even at 45 pounds, is fast. That's the pro. But here's kind of the under the bus. So we throw the paddle cat and the round boat under the bus to try to come up with something better, especially from an R1 perspective. Even at 45 pounds, it can be fast and track, but it feels like a ton of bricks, just in general. Like, even when you are going fast, you're just like, why am I putting out so much output? And I don't know if that just gets better with time, where you're just like, no, I can put in less effort. But here's what happens, is that its rotational momentum is so slow to turn. And if it hooks up, is going to turn. So even when you're just tracking straight, if it gets offline a little bit, like, it just wants to take itself offline. And so a lot of the, like, over energy, I think I used that word maybe later, but yeah, it just takes so much energy to straighten out. So rotational movements are wasting tons of energy, and it will catch an edge when tracking straight. Cool. And that can be very difficult and energy exhausting to keep online. I have a really hard time just kind of like looking over my words, and it's just like, yeah, that's exactly what I just said, but it just didn't look like I was going to say that. All right, hell yeah. Now the round boat. The round boat, even at 60 to 70 pounds, like my boat is kind of currently, because it's just, I don't know, I have a lot of material in there. Stock weight is 60, but guaranteed it's like 70, maybe even more. But that's the crazy thing. Even when my boat is fully loaded on the Grand Canyon, it's easy to paddle. It just feels easy. When I go for a pry, and let's talk about that. When you do an R1 pry, because you do a paddle and then your pry, the pry actually moves the boat because it is rockered under. That's the one thing that I don't know how to figure out. Like, I was thinking about, like, do you make a paddle cat look like a paddle cat, an R1 paddle cat in the front, but then in the back have like does it become a rounded boat? And it seems like that's a sucky design because, I don't know, it seems like your cockpit's going to get reduced, especially if you have the middle part of the boat taper, where you still have those two tubes as you know, out of the, you know, railed. But the back part of the boat, if you can get the back part of the boat to be rounded and smooth, no, I'm going to say it, I think that's superior. I think that's what I want. Look a little like a Millennium Falcon or something. Hell yeah, because the pry, from an R1 perspective, is your strongest move. Like, even from a dead stop, I throw in the pry, and it's just like, I'm prying. Like, it's definitionally, mechanical advantage. And yeah, so to lose the pry in a paddle cat, that's where I'm just like, these paddle cats suck. That's why, yeah, I was bummed when I got my paddle cat and paddling around the lake, and I'd say things like, yeah, there's no magic in this, and there isn't around a lake. It's strategically awful because it kind of tracks and stuff. But that's why we use negative terms, because I know the future of this can get so much brighter. And so, but yeah, do you see the difference? Because even when I talk about my round boat, I mean, it flips out so easy, you know, but in my voice, I don't have that's a huge negative thing, but that's the bias. That was the term, bias. It's like I'm extremely biased to a round boat. But going to the Whitewater Center and having to spend the entire 2 weeks there, you know what I mean? And, you know, in a paddle cat, I was just like, oh, hell yeah. This thing is superior in a whole lot of ways. Cool, let's read this. So I have spent years trying to edge in my round boat, just trying to figure out how to get speed. So edging as hard as possible to get my boat to track, and it works. I get the boat to track. So, hell yeah, and have a faster cutting speed through the water. And when I get my round boat to track, it is now becoming like a canoe. And that's what, in a paddle cat, would be so cool. If you could get one tube, if you could get the other tube out of the water, edging one tube to get the other tube leveraged out of the water. That would be killer. So it was, and even if you couldn't do that 100%, like I said, there's a spectrum. So even if you can get close to reducing the weight on that outer tube, that's huge. And then you could make, if you're a lefty, then you could make a lefty paddle R1 paddle cat, you know, where your sitting tube is going to be larger and the other tube is more like an outrigger tube. There's so many interesting designs you could do. Okay, hell yeah. So it was this limitation that I found Yeah, so even in my round boats, because we're trying to throw it under the bus, just hairy ferries, or just even normal ferries in Class 4 rapids of just above features I didn't want to go into, like a hole that would flip me every time. And also, that's knocking on the round boat. This hole flips me every time. Did I flip once at the Whitewater Center? No. Did I fall backwards out, into the void because the paddle cat doesn't have any back end? Hell yeah. Like tons of times I just fell out. Okay, so these ferries, though, hairy ferries on harder rivers, seem to be the biggest limitation. I got over this by switching sides. In the one that I'm thinking about on the Locksaw at Horsetail Falls, it requires me to be on the upstream side. If you're on the upstream side when ferrying, you can upstream ferry and downstream ferry, if that makes sense. But as long as you're on the upstream tube, the ferry is going to work way better, because being on the upstream tube, you slow downstream momentum. We talked about how in a lot of different videos, if you're on the downstream, you're going to be catching current, stuff like that. But yeah, so just learning how to paddle on the offside remedied this quite a bit. But still, it is a limitation. My boat is horrifically round. Even when I do lean it onto edge, it still doesn't feel like a cat tube, like a straight cat tube. It's still highly rockered, single tube. So if the boat gets surfed sideways, it will go sideways. And what are we talking about? So is that a hard stop on that? So that was the limitation on the hairy ferries. So if the boat gets surfed sideways, this must be another negative, it will go sideways like a champ. I don't even know if that sentence makes sense. But in must-make ferries, up and over pyramid-like waves. Oh, yeah. So because my boat is so surfy, like sometimes I get surfed sideways and it's for the win. Like on the Grand Canyon in Hance Rapid, you just don't want to be down the right side. And it was, I was even a lefty and I was paddling on the upstream side and we couldn't do the ferry. We just choked on that ferry. And but then we hit a wave that just surfed us to the left. And even a big group behind was watching me, and the guides in this. Because I talked to them later, and they were like, "Oh hell yeah, we thought you were messed up." But then all of a sudden, this wave just surfed me, and it surfed me so hard to the left, and that's because my boat just surfs. It's literally a beach ball, you know what I mean? So a beach ball went into the pyramid-shaped wave, and it got surfed off the left side, and now it has momentum to the left. So that's literally all that's going on. But yes, there are times where, yes, getting surfed helps out a lot. But check this out. Let's say you have to cross a wave train. Huge wave train on the Stikine or something. It's like crossing a mountain. You need to have momentum up into that mountain, get your edges, and angles and all that to be able to cross. You're going to be using a combination of edging and surfing as well, but you still need to be able to cut. I'm going to use the word cut. You still need to make a cut. And my round boat doesn't do that hardly at all. So in must-make ferries, up and over pyramid-like wave trains, it's extremely hard to find that cutting edge. You almost have to treat it like you're gonna surf into the wave train, surf into a trough, and then just get surfing momentum across. But in a kayak, you can do the same thing, but kayaks can also just muscle their way through with a driving cutting edge. And in my boat, that's going to be the negative. That doesn't happen, where a paddle cat could make up for that. Hell yeah. All right, and we're probably not almost there, but almost. Hell yeah, is this it? Hell yeah, so my boat has sideways rocker. This causes my boat to flip easy. This is the only thing that allows my boat to edge completely out of the water, though. But the paddle cat, we talked about how we could edge a paddle cat out of the water. And so, but with my boat, this is going to be fun for small waves, but it is still very difficult to control. So even on small waves, we talked about how my body is going to be at the bottom of the wave. If the boat does edge completely, the sideways surface profile of my boat now just became nothing, and it's going to be difficult to control. It's going to flip out compared to a paddle cat, which always has two tubes, maybe engaged. So that makes the stability way more stable. So it's going to be very difficult to control, and it puts my boat so far down in that hole that when it does bite, it almost bites too much. So if it does bite, it's going to bite into a high side. If I'm in the back corner, it could get, that's where you can do 180 or like 360s, kind of just spinning on that tube, because you're like the bottom of a top. You're like all the weight's kind of on this point, and then the boat's spinning around, that hole. But that's going to be unstable. It's fun. It's hard to control. So compared to a paddle cat that cannot have its entire contact patch down in that hole when sideways, because the other tube is always touching, water, usually on the exit, the downstream exit of a hole. But this also makes the paddle cat different than a whitewater kayak. Yeah, so fundamentally, a paddle cat is way different underfoot than a whitewater kayak. Which can easily, and so a whitewater kayak can easily edge. So I just don't know if a paddle cat, a traditional, like current paddle cat is going to be, I don't know, you know what I mean? Because the other tube can't get edged out of the water. Let's just read this because we're almost done. Which can easily edge. So a whitewater kayak can easily edge. And surfing back and forth around a wave's pile. That's if you have a surf wave with a pile, like that's what you're going to be doing, So, but this is what happened, is that even if you have a surf wave with a pile, to the left and the right of the pile is still an angled wave down into the trough. So let's pick a wave. Let's do Hellhole on the Ocoee. And this is one where I should have spent more time down there. And, I didn't even get good surfing Hellhole in my round boat. And I should take the paddle cat and probably be able to surf it pretty good. Even though the fat cat's just a little bit big for doing technical maneuvers. So what am I explaining? So even if that pile is in the middle, maybe one cat tubes on one side of it, one cat tubes on the other side of that pile. Those cat tubes are still driving down the trough, and you can still drive in, fairly, you can still surf down the wave fairly stable. But the second those cat tubes do turn, you're going to be turning, and unless that wave's big enough to keep you in, it's such a weird catch-22, and the remedy is just make smaller paddle cats, combine these features. We're almost done. But hell yeah, so because those two paddle cat tubes do surf, like the second they grip that water, man, they just want to surf down that trough. And so I think that's highly superior. And we talked about how those two tubes are, having two is way more stable than just one. Because even a round boat that goes up against a wave, now you just have, like, if you think about it, the length of that boat is going to be like a line. And that's your stability point. It's way unstable. It always wants to turn. It's very difficult to surf down square. And so you always have this boat that's going to go sideways too and get pieced off or just turn to a flip. And so, yes, that's a good visual. And take a little break, but we need to finish this. So the paddle cat would purl, but rotationally can spin. Yeah, so I don't know. I found even in these large waves, the paddle cat would go down. It would purl. It would catch, maybe spin. But if the wave was big enough, it would spin to a new surfable position. And I think what I talk about here is that I can jump. That's the huge advantage of a paddle cat. If you jump to the tube that's on the pile or the most surfable tube, you can hold that surf. So I think that could be superior. All right, one more paragraph. I would like to see two improvements to both the paddle cat and to round boats. That would be two completely different boats, but both improved in a positive direction for R1 boating. I would like to see the paddle cat be able to be fully edged. I think that would be cool. And we also talked about a spectrum, even partial. That's hell yeah. And thinking on my feet, a sideways stair-step design. Oh, so this is a brand new one. So to get it to edge fully, maybe you have a stair-step design, sideways, where if I'm sitting on the outer tube of a paddle cat, both tubes are engaged. One is heavier because my weight is on it. But then if I lean out farther onto that tube, maybe because of sideways stair-step design, then the boat falls onto that new tube. And then even with stair-step, so like let's say, because you're displacing water, that's how you get buoyancy. So let's say the first stair-step displaces my water. The other stair-step can still be like right at the water's level. It's just when I go lean on it, then it kind of acts as a hinge. So even if you had a stair step, and then the other is right at the water level, when I go just lean out on it, the other one acts as a hinge and then drops in. So I think thinking about the stair step from this, that was the first time I ever thought about that. That could be the most effective way to sit in one position in an R1 boat, move 6 inches to a foot, very small distances, and have the boat now tip and not roll. Like my boat's just going to roll like a beach ball. We talked about that. But tip to another stable point, kind of this idea of sponsons. And, all right, I think I have to use the bathroom. So, hell yeah, we got to be done with this. So, and thinking on my feet, yes, that's sideways stair-step design. Excelente. I don't think I can say excelente no more. It seems like anyway, enough said on that. But yeah, I gotta not say that, I don't think. Used to say that a lot in college. But anyway, especially if that's the only Spanish word I know, you know what I mean? That's, I don't know why we're ending with that. That sucks. All right, so sit in the normal sitting position and both tubes are engaged. So I'm just explaining with that stair step. So when I'm sitting in my normal position, cool, both tubes are engaged. But the second I lean out onto that new stair step, leaning out on a flat section of tube that was just elevated at water level, I should read this word for word. And now the other side of the boat is now out of the water. Cool. That's maybe one way to do it. So that seems easier said than done. But the benefits are there, even if you can't get the other tube completely out of the water. And so there it is. So even with the paddle cat, I can weight my paddle cat, the RMR Fat Cat, just like my round boat, and get subtle benefits. But the idea is to be like, hey, you know what I mean? Let's improve upon that. Get the boat to release 3/4. Get the boat to edge on one tube. Get the boat smaller, you know what I mean? And get the boat, I don't know, even more. We talked about rounded shape. So even with the paddle cat, if it's stuck in a wave, you still want it to be kind of rounded side tubes, kind of sponson, because those are tubes that weren't in the water in a neutral position, but now are touching the hull or the incoming wave. And so now can turn your boat. And I think that's going to be superior. And even just kind of, I don't know. I'll throw it out there as a mental image. Take a whitewater kayak, cut a strip down the middle, and potentially you're going to get. No, I will end it there, because if you did took a whitewater kayak, cut a strip down the middle, and then that's what your cat tube would look like, your paddle cat. Obviously increase the size so it fits an R1, design. I think I'm just gonna end with that. I think even if you have a sharp cutout of a paddle cat in that design in the middle, that it would still. I think that sharp design is not going to be a detriment, because if you're side surfing, that sharp design is going to help you pull out of the wave. Yeah, I was trying to think of ways that the sharp interior would actually be a detriment, but I think it would most likely always be a positive. It would be a detriment if you're trying to just slide it sideways and one of those sharp edges is is ramming into the water. But like obviously you could have a slight lip. But hell yeah, I think that could even have benefits. And so that's a good visual of potentially improving a paddle cat design, turning the paddle cat into an R1 rafting surfing machine, and then just, yes, if you can R1 surf with, what do you call it, skill, I think R1 surf, especially big surf, and in these holes, especially hole situations, if you can enter a hole, surf a hole, and exit a hole, that would be what I would want before tackling something like the Stikine. Before, just thinking the Stikine is just like a strap myself to my boat and turn it into a flotation device. Hell yeah. And in the 2-point design of I didn't flip once at the Whitewater Center. So when you're talking big waves, and yeah, so I don't know. Yeah, it's just fascinating. And I'm glad I talked down my round boat because, yes, the second it fills with water, it's no longer fun to surf. You're just stuck in a side surf. And in some of these pour-over holes, you're just like, oh, I can't put my boat in there because I'll get stuck permanently. All right, we got to end it. Hopefully that was enough juice to revolutionize the industry of R1 rafting and how to take round boats and paddle cats and come up with 2 different designs that are in a step in the right direction. Hell yeah.